the daughters do you think is more like Janet?
I can't
You
say.
don't know. Okay. I just thought, because I don't know them very well. I've had a lot of conversations with Jamie, it seemed, and I've had a lot of conversations with Tony Curtis, and there's a certain kind of bombastic similarity. So I just was kind of wondering whether you had ever picked up on that. Tell me a little bit about, were you involved with Janet a lot on Manchurian Candidate and how that whole thing evolved?
No, I wasn't. That was
Okay.
Sinatra's Productions. And as I say, I was still with the studio. I believe
Right.
I was with Fox at that point.
In terms of the other women who were at MGM at the time, like June Allison and Elizabeth Taylor, is there anyone who stands out in your memory because of your involvement with them on a career level?
Well, obviously, I handled Elizabeth Taylor for years, all through from the beginning of what Richard Burton used to call the scandale. And I was still with Fox, and they sent me over to deal with the problems with Elizabeth and Richard in Rome. And of course, I had already been involved with Richard, and then I got very involved with Elizabeth through that, and I represented Elizabeth and Richard right up through the time, as a matter of fact, when they broke up, the columnist said, which one gets the custody of John Springer? And I stayed with them both. It was funny because at one point in time I was representing Richard, Elizabeth, Sybil, Richard's first wife, who had started a great discotheque, first of the most popular of the discotheques. Jordan, who Sybil married, and Debbie Reynolds, who fitted in there somewhere. I wasn't, thank heaven, I was never involved with
At least you were
Mr.
Fisher.
Fisher.
The thing that Janet told me that I never forgot about Elizabeth Taylor was that she said when she first went to MGM and she'd go to the commissary, Elizabeth was always sitting with her mother. The mother never wanted her to sit with the other people and mix. And she said that she always felt very bad that Elizabeth never had the experience of being a teenager with other teenagers, being in school, going to college the way she did, and that in so many ways she was so uncomfortable trying to be kind of on a par with her own age group.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that, yes, of course. Elizabeth started as a child actress. She was a child when she did things like Lassie Come Home and National Velvet and so forth. Jane Eyre. She was she wasn't a young actress, she was a child. And her mother was very important in her involvement. But we're not talking about Elizabeth now.
Well, in a way we are, because we're talking about the MGM environment, and Janet has sent me tons of pictures of herself on the town with Arthur Lowe Jr.
Yeah.
and Tom Neal. Is it Tom Neal or Bob Neal? And
Bob
Elizabeth.
Bob Neal.
They used to double date.
There was Tom Neal, but that wasn't he.
Right, Bob Neal.
Yeah.
And they used to double date a lot. And it's kind of interesting because I know that they had, over the years they had been friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you couldn't find a more interesting contrast in terms of, if you look at them as very young women, 19, 20-year-olds, than Janet and Elizabeth, because of the fact that, at least according to Janet, Elizabeth was kind of kept in a bubble by her mother. Very much like Natalie Wood, as a child star.
That's quite true. Although Natalie had a lot more, I think, freedom and chance to get out from under her mother's thumb than Elizabeth did. to a point.
Right. But do you think that, what do you think would be the, like, in terms of as you knew them as actresses, what would be the single biggest difference between Janet Leigh and Elizabeth Taylor?
Oh, I can't. It's like comparing apples and oranges. Both Elizabeth and Janet were their own person and were pretty true to their own person, and they remain so, both of them, to this day.
But you talk about Janet being so real. Would you say that Elizabeth preferred much more to be in a more rarefied environment than Janet? That she liked life that was far more rarefied than Janet?
I never gave that any thought, and I don't want to really.
Yeah, because
get into
there's
it.
so much stuff about Janet going fly fishing and riding around on motorcycles and playing tennis.
Yeah,
and
well,
I never think of
Elizabeth just
Elizabeth
isn't that kind of person.
Yeah, that's what I meant in terms of how they are as real people rather than.
Well, as they were as real people, you know, Elizabeth grew up. She was a important movie star by the time she was a kid. She was a child still. And Janet just suddenly was plucked out of normal childhood and and became an overnight movie star in her very first picture.
Right.
But Janet continued to be the same kind of fresh kid that she had been. Elizabeth grew in different directions.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth Taylor though had far more of or maybe her mother did, of a concept of being an avant-garde performer, being involved with people like Monty Cliff, being aspiring to, it seemed as though Janet kind of said, well, okay, whatever you want me to be in, I'll be in, you know best, where I got the feeling that Elizabeth Taylor was, probably because of her long career, had much more of a focus of where she wanted to go.
I'm sure she had that. I really don't want it to get into Elizabeth,
Sure.
though. That's
Okay.
another
Okay.
completely different.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about.
How about the fact that wasn't it Richard Rodgers wanted Janet to lead in the Broadway in their next
Right.
big production,
Are you
and
familiar-
Tony Curtis said, if we do this, we're going to wind up apart.
Do you remember Janet's offer to appear on Broadway by Richard Rodgers?
No, I do not.
Okay, great. Okay, that's in her book too. It's a.
I
part
haven't
she
read her
turned
book for
down.
so many years. I've
Right.
lost.
Why don't we turn off for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have a response, just tell me. What the most surprising thing Janet ever said to you was?
Oh, I have no
You have
idea.
no idea. Okay. Then can you tell me what we were repeat what we were talking about before when you said that when she played in this Columbo, that it was so remarkable because it was so unlike her. Can you just tell me the story of that Columbo?
Well, one of the clips that I'm using from my for the Janet Leigh event at the Players Club is a moment from the Columbo where she played an aged movie star living in the past, living in her own glory, watching her pictures over and over again. And, she just sits there with her eyes bright and just loving the image of herself on screen. That was never Janet. She gave a beautiful performance as that kind of crazy old broad who had the glamour and didn't want to let go of it. But that's not Janet. No way.
Great. And I wanted to ask you one other question. Norma Shearer was the widow of
Irving Thalberg.
Irving Thalberg, and she was a major stockholder at MGM. What do you think Norma Shearer saw in that photograph of Janet? Do you have you any thoughts on
I
it?
have no idea. I've only barely knew Norma Shearer. Her day was before my day. I was still a schoolboy when.
Do you think it was that she believed in people being discovered rather than?
Well, stars were in those days. Stars were discovered, and Norma Shearer did see something special, a freshness, an un-Hollywood kind of beauty from this kid, and she thought there was something. Whatever it was, let's give Norma Shearer credit for very good taste.
That's it. All right, let's get out of here.
Fantastic, thank you.